They marched me through the palace in restraints as if I might suddenly sprout claws and chew through the walls. For the record, I do not have claws. I checked. The cuffs around my wrists hummed with a polite but firm energy field, the kind designed to discourage sudden heroics. Every few steps they pulsed, reminding me that the Arcanian Empire preferred its guests docile. I considered asking whether they had a less humiliating tour package, but the guards looked like they hadn't updated their sense of humor in at least 3 galactic cycles. Whispers followed us down the corridor. That's the human. He was in the Defense Corps. They say he touched the primary lattice. I wanted to turn around and correct them. I hadn't just touched the primary lattice. I had practically married it for 12 catastrophic minutes. Instead, I kept walking. The corridor stretched endlessly, a ribbon of silver light bending upward into an impossible curve. Gravity here was selective. It pressed gently on my shoulders, but left the banners above us floating in lazy spirals. The Empire liked to remind visitors that even physics followed its etiquette. A hovering surveillance orb drifted closer to my face, its lens widening as if sniffing for guilt. I crossed my eyes at it. The orb retreated, offended. "I think it likes you," one of the guards muttered. "Story of my life," I said. "The machines always do." He almost smiled. Almost. The great chamber doors loomed ahead, taller than any building back on Earth. They were etched with scenes of ancient victories, starships splitting suns, warriors riding beams of light, the long-eared ancestors of this empire standing triumphant over collapsing galaxies. The message was clear. This civilization had survived worse than me, which was comforting, in a humiliating sort of way. They pushed the doors open. The chamber swallowed us whole. Rows of nobles lined the circular hall, their garments shimmering with programmable constellations. Each collar bore the sigil of a house older than my species, written language. Their ears, long, elegant, slightly curved, tilted toward me in synchronized suspicion. It was impressive, really. If paranoia were an art form, they'd mastered it. I tried a nod. No one nodded back. They guided me to the center platform. The floor lit up beneath my boots, scanning my biometrics with a soft cascade of alien symbols. The data rippled outward into the chamber's holographic canopy. I imagined it reading, "Human, probably trouble." To them, I wasn't the man who had stood alone in the Defense Corps while alarms tore through the station. I was the anomaly in the system, a species not accounted for in their sacred algorithms. One noble stepped forward, robes trailing like liquid starlight. "You were found at the primary defense lattice during the catastrophic surge." "Found is a strong word," I said. I was more actively participating. A ripple of disapproval moved through the chamber. The noble's eyes narrowed. "The surge that nearly destroyed the orbital shield." "Correction," I said carefully, "the surge that didn't." That earned me several scandalized gasps. One elderly courtier actually clutched his chest as if I had insulted gravity itself. They projected the event above us. A miniature recreation of the defense grid spun in the air, threads of energy forming a protective sphere around the capital. Then came the anomaly. A fragment of dark matter debris, dense as a collapsed star, drifting silently toward impact. The system labeled it benign. The system was wrong. The projection showed a human silhouette at the lattice controls. Me. "You accessed restricted protocols," another voice said. "Yes," I replied, "because the unrestricted ones were busy failing." I probably should have phrased that more diplomatically. The guards tightened their grip on my arms. The cuffs pulsed again, a subtle reminder that sarcasm was not a defense strategy. They replayed the moment the lattice overloaded. Energy spiked. The grid flickered. In the projection, I reached into the central interface, literally reached into raw light and overrode the trajectory calculations. The debris shifted course at the last possible second, skimming past the shield instead of punching through it. The chamber watched in silence. Then the projection froze on the aftermath. Alarms screaming, security drones swarming, and me being tackled by 3 very enthusiastic officers. "Why?" the first noble demanded. "Did the system register your override as hostile?" "Because," I said, "your system assumes every authorized neural signature has long ears." A few younger courtiers blinked, confused. One stifled a laugh before catching himself. "It wasn't built for humans," I continued. "When I rerouted the lattice through my interface patch, it flagged me as an intruder." Which, technically, I was. just an intruder trying to keep your palace from becoming decorative debris. The tension in the room thickened. They weren't ready to accept that their ancient, perfect defense array had been saved by a maintenance contractor from Earth who occasionally talked to machines like they were stubborn pets. A murmur spread across the chamber. Words like sabotage and coincidence drifted through the air. I exhaled slowly. "I didn't come here to rewrite your empire," I said. "I came here to fix a faulty grav stabilizer in Dock 12. The apocalypse was unexpected." Silence. One of the guards leaned closer. "If you are innocent, human, why did you not flee when the drones arrived?" I looked at him. "Have you ever tried outrunning your drones?" He paused. "No." "Exactly." A faint ripple of reluctant amusement moved through the outer ring of spectators, but the nobles at the front remained unmoved. "You stand accused," the first noble said, voice echoing through the chamber's acoustic field, "of unlawful interference with imperial defense systems, of trespass within restricted sanctums, and of destabilizing the lattice." I glanced up at the frozen projection of the diverted debris, still glowing harmlessly beyond the shield. "If that's destabilized," I said quietly, "I'd hate to see stable." The doors at the far end of the chamber began to open. Not with force, not with drama, just with certainty. Every noble turned. Every guard straightened. Even the surveillance orb that had been following me since the corridor drifted higher, as if it, too, understood hierarchy. I felt the shift before I saw her. And for the first time since they placed the restraints on my wrists, I wondered whether this was the moment everything truly began or the moment it ended. No one announced her. They didn't need to. The entire chamber shifted as she entered, like a system recalibrating around a new gravitational constant. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the projection above us dimmed, as if embarrassed to compete. She walked forward without hurry. I had seen Arcanians before. Traitors. Engineers. A diplomat who once tried to explain their tax code to me and nearly caused an interspecies incident. They all had the same unmistakable trait: long, elegant ears curving slightly back from their temples, expressive in ways humans could never quite interpret correctly. But the woman approaching the center platform carried something else entirely. Authority, yes. Precision, certainly. But also a stillness that made the rest of us feel like we were fidgeting children. Her gaze settled on me. I considered bowing. I considered fainting. I settled for standing very still and trying not to look like someone currently glowing in 3 different security overlays. The nobles parted. "Your Majesty," the first noble said, dropping to one knee so quickly I worried about his cartilage. "Ah, so this was the queen. Good, no pressure." She stopped a few steps away from me, close enough that I could see faint lines of light tracing along the crystalline strands woven through her hair and ears. Thin circuits humming softly, translating neural signals into layered data. A living interface between ruler and empire. She studied the restraints around my wrists. "Remove them," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The guards hesitated for exactly half a heartbeat. Then the cuffs disengaged with a soft chime and retracted into inert bands. Blood rushed back into my hands. I flexed my fingers carefully, resisting the urge to rub my wrists like a melodramatic stage actor. "Thank you," I said. Several nobles made small, scandalized noises, as if gratitude itself were a breach of protocol. The queen's eyes never left mine. "You accessed the primary defense lattice," she said. "Yes." "You altered its trajectory calculations." "Yes." "You did so without authorization." I considered this. In my defense, the debris also lacked authorization. A pause. Somewhere behind me, someone choked on a suppressed laugh. It sounded expensive. Her long ears tilted slightly, the crystalline threads along them emitting a faint harmonic shift. I had learned enough about Arcanian physiology to know that meant she was processing more than just my words. Micro-expressions. Heart rate, neural fluctuations. Great. Lie detection by jewelry. "The lattice," she continued, "was constructed 12 generations ago. Its predictive algorithms have not failed in recorded history." "They did," I said gently. A murmur moved through the chamber again, sharper this time. She gestured. The projection above us resumed, replaying the approach of the dark matter fragment. It drifted silently toward the shield, its mass compressing local spacetime like a careless god leaning on a table. "Our system identified it as dormant stellar residue," she said. It wasn't dormant, I replied. It was phase shifted. The outer layers were cold, but the core was active. Your sensors read the surface and assumed the rest. And you saw this. I've worked salvage near collapsed stars, I said. You learn to distrust anything that looks polite. A faint ripple passed through her ears again. Amusement, irritation, I was not fluent enough to know. You rewrote Imperial code, one noble interjected. Human code. I patched it, I corrected. Temporarily, I routed the trajectory model through a human adaptive interface. Your algorithms are elegant, but they assume uniform cognition. Humans are less uniform. That is not a compliment, the noble snapped. It wasn't meant to be. A few younger courtiers failed to hide their smiles. The queen raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. You understood, she said to me, that the override would trigger security protocols. Yes, and yet you proceeded. Yes. Why? Because I didn't want to watch a palace implode. Because I didn't want to be remembered as the contractor who almost said something. Because sometimes you act before you are invited. Instead, I said, because your shield was about to fail. Her gaze sharpened. Above us, the projection shifted to the moment of divergence. The fragment's path bending at the last possible second. The shield holding, the palace intact. Then the next sequence, alarms, red overlays, my neural signature flagged as hostile. Drones deploying. You were classified as an intruder, she said. Technically accurate, I admitted, just inconvenient. You could have disengaged once the trajectory shifted. I shook my head. The lattice was destabilizing. When I forced the recalculation, it created feedback in the lower rings. If I'd pulled out immediately, the shield would have fractured anyway. I had to dampen the cascade. A flicker of surprise crossed several faces. You stabilized the lower rings? Someone whispered. With duct tape and optimism, I said, metaphorically. The queen stepped closer. Close enough now that I could see my own reflection in her eyes. You risked your life, she said. I was already inside a collapsing energy matrix, I replied. At that point, leaving would have been rude. Silence again, not hostile this time. Considering. You are aware, she said slowly, that had you failed, you would have been remembered as the one who destroyed this capital. Yes, and yet you acted. I hesitated. Your Majesty, I said carefully. With respect, I didn't act to be remembered. Something shifted in the chamber then. Not volume, not posture. Weight. The nobles who had looked at me like a malfunctioning device now watched with something more complicated. The queen turned her head slightly, addressing the chamber without breaking eye contact with me. Our systems did not account for a human neural architecture, she said. They interpreted deviation as threat. That's generally how deviation works, I muttered. Her lips curved barely. The question before this court, she continued, is not whether he interfered. She stepped onto the central platform beside me. It is whether that interference preserved the empire. Every eye in the chamber locked onto us. I swallowed. For the first time since being dragged through those doors, I felt something other than defensiveness. Hope, which, in my experience, is far more dangerous. The projection above us shifted once more, isolating a single frame. The moment my override synchronized with the lattice and the fragment's path changed. A narrow window. One decision, one outcome. The queen studied it, then she looked back at me. And for the first time, I had the distinct, unsettling feeling that I was no longer on trial. I was being evaluated. They asked me to explain exactly what I did. That was a mistake. You want the short version, I said, flexing my fingers now that the restraints were gone, or the version that makes me sound competent. The accurate version, the high noble replied. Ah, I said, that one is less flattering. The queen inclined her head slightly. Proceed. Above us, the projection shifted to a direct feed from the Defense Corps archives. The chamber darkened just enough for the lattice model to dominate the air between us. Rings of energy rotated around the capital, layered like translucent shields. Elegant, ancient, arrogant. The fragment appeared at the edge of your outer scan field, I began. Your sensors categorized it as inert stellar residue, because its outer shell emitted low radiation and minimal kinetic flux. That classification was correct, one of the defense ministers said sharply. It was half correct, I replied. Which is the worst kind? A few scattered murmurs. I stepped closer to the projection and pointed at the glowing mass drifting toward the shield. Your system reads surface data and extrapolates inward based on historical models. But this fragment wasn't historical. It was phase-sheathed. The outer layer was dormant. The core was compressing exotic matter. Silence, one of the younger analysts frowned. Compressing? That would require a gravitational inversion pocket, I finished. Yes, a ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber. That phenomenon is theoretical, someone snapped. So was a human patching your sacred lattice 5 minutes before impact, I said. We're having a very productive day. The Queen's ears tilted slightly. Not reprimand, not quite approval. Continue, she said. I drew a breath. When the fragment crossed the second scan threshold, the lattice prepared for standard deflection. That would have worked if the mass were uniform. But when it hit the first energy ring, the core reacted. It began to collapse inward. The projection replayed the moment. The shield flaring, the fragment dimming, then brightening from within. Your system interpreted that as absorption, I said. It increased output to compensate. That is correct protocol, the defense minister insisted. Yes, I agreed, and it would have fed the for about 12 very uncomfortable seconds. And during those seconds, the Queen asked, I forced the trajectory to shift laterally instead of pushing directly outward. Instead of fighting the collapse, I redirected the fragment along a gravitational slipstream. The projection showed the thin arc of altered course. The fragment skimming past the shield, missing the palace by a margin so narrow it felt personal. You gambled, the defense minister said. Yes, I replied, but I gambled with math. And if your recalculation had been incorrect, then I wouldn't be here explaining it. A strained chuckle rippled through the outer rings. The Queen stepped closer to the projection, examining the cascade that followed. After the fragment passed, she said, the lower rings destabilized. I nodded. When I overrode the core, it created feedback. The lattice doesn't like being contradicted. Few things do, she said quietly. I glanced at her, unsure whether that was about the shield or the court. I had to dampen the oscillation, I continued. So I injected a counterharmonic through the auxiliary nodes. You rewrote harmonic code on the fly? An analyst asked, incredulous. I hummed at it aggressively, I said. Same principle. This time, laughter broke more freely. Even a few nobles allowed themselves the smallest release of tension. The Queen turned back to me. You remained in the core chamber while security classified you as hostile. Yes. You understood that automated defenses might terminate you. I did, and yet you did not disconnect. I shrugged. If I'd pulled out too early, the feedback would have fractured the shield anyway. Besides, your drones are very dramatic. I didn't want to encourage them. A guard near the edge coughed to hide a laugh. The high noble folded his hands. You expect this court to believe that you, a maintenance contractor from a peripheral species, corrected an error in an imperial system that has endured for generations. I met his gaze. No, I said. I expect you to believe your system isn't infallible. That landed harder than I intended. Silence stretched. The projection looped the critical moment again. The divergence, the survival. The Queen spoke at last. Our archives confirm that had the lattice continued standard deflection, the fragment's core would have collapsed within the first ring. A faint tremor moved through the chamber. Our simulations, she continued, now reflect the same outcome the human predicted. All eyes shifted to me. I resisted the urge to bow theatrically. So, I said lightly, good news, I'm not a criminal mastermind. Just inconveniently correct. The tension in the room had changed. It hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. Suspicion was giving way to something more unsettling, possibility. The Queen regarded me in silence for a long moment. Then she said, there is still the matter of the imperial response. I blinked. Yes, she continued. The part where our own systems declared you an enemy. I sighed. That part was less fun. And yet, she said, without your interference, this palace would not be standing. The chamber absorbed that. For the first time since I had been dragged in chains across their polished floors, I felt the axis of the conversation tilt. Not toward forgiveness, toward reckoning. And I had the distinct impression that the next decision would not merely determine my fate, it would redefine theirs. The silence lasted long enough for me to consider several poor life choices. One of them was speaking. The Queen stood at the center of the platform with me, the projection of the diverted fragment slowly dissolving above us. The nobles were no longer whispering. They were calculating. The imperial response, the High Noble repeated carefully, was appropriate. The system identified a foreign neural signature overriding core defense protocols. Yes, I said, your system panicked. Our system does not panic. It absolutely panicked, I replied. It deployed 6 assault drones, locked down 3 sectors, and tried to vent the chamber I was standing in. That feels emotional. A faint ripple moved through the outer ring of courtiers. The Queen did not look at the High Noble. She looked at the defense logs unfolding in thin strands of light around her fingers. Our automated countermeasures escalated to lethal authorization in 4-3 seconds, she said. That was generous, I muttered. On Earth we at least count to 5. A guard coughed again, poorly disguising a laugh. The High Noble stiffened. The escalation was necessary. The lattice is sacred. And now it's slightly less sacred and slightly more functional, I said. He turned toward me fully. You presume much for someone who stands under suspicion. I tilted my head. Do I still? The question lingered. The Queen raised her hand, and the chamber's ambient systems shifted. A new projection formed, not of the fragment, not of the lattice, but of the palace itself. The structure, the shield, the energy flows threading through its foundations. She isolated a single calculation path. This was the projected outcome had the lattice continued its original deflection, she said. The model ran. The fragment struck the first ring. The energy surged. The core collapsed inward. Then the palace's internal systems buckled. The simulation showed a cascade, floor by floor, tower by tower, gravity folding in unnatural spirals. No explosion, just disappearance. A few nobles inhaled sharply. That projection is theoretical, the High Noble said. So was your sense of security, I murmured. The Queen let the simulation play to completion. Nothing remained. Then she dismissed it with a flick of her fingers. Silence. She turned to me. You understood the consequences. Yes. You also understood that if you failed, your species would bear the blame. I hesitated. Yes. And yet you acted. Yes. Why? She asked again, softer this time. I considered offering something noble, something historic. Instead, I said, because I was there. A few confused expressions flickered. If I had been anywhere else, I continued, someone else might have tried, or no one would have. I didn't have time to calculate legacy or politics. I saw a problem. I tried to fix it. You risked an empire on instinct, the High Noble said. I trusted math, I replied. Instinct just pushed the button. The Queen studied me in silence. Then she stepped away. The chamber parted as she moved toward a raised alcove embedded in the wall. A narrow case rested there, sealed by layered quantum locks. I hadn't noticed it before. Most people probably hadn't. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. She placed her palm against the surface. The locks dissolved into threads of light. The nobles shifted uneasily. What is she doing? Someone whispered. I had no idea. The case opened. Inside rested a single object. It wasn't large. It wasn't ornate in the way I expected imperial artifacts to be. No oversized gemstones. No theatrical glow. Just a circular piece of dark metal etched with shifting symbols that rearranged themselves too quickly to memorize. The Queen lifted it carefully. A faint harmonic tone resonated through the chamber. Not from the object alone, but from the crystalline strands woven through her ears. They vibrated in response, synchronizing with the metal's frequency. The High Noble's expression changed. Your Majesty, he began cautiously, that honor has not been invoked in 12 generations, she finished. A murmur swept the hall. I leaned slightly toward the nearest guard. Is this the part where I run? Do not, he whispered urgently. Understood. The Queen returned to the center platform. She stood before me again. The metal hovered above her palm now, suspended by a thin field of controlled gravity. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if aware of the attention. This artifact, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the chamber, is awarded only once in a generation. No one moved. It recognizes not rank, not lineage, not species. Her eyes held mine. It recognizes consequence. The High Noble stepped forward. Your Majesty, this decision will echo across allied systems. Yes, she said calmly, it will. She turned slightly so the entire chamber could see both of us. Our systems declared him hostile, she continued. Our protocols restrained him, our court presumed guilt. A few nobles lowered their gaze. Yet the simulations confirm that without his intervention, this palace, and all within it would have ceased to exist. The harmonic tone deepened. The metal's symbols shifted more rapidly now, responding to biometric readings, to historical data streams feeding from the archives. I swallowed. "This is unnecessary," I murmured quietly to her. Her eyes flicked down briefly. "No," she said, "it is overdue." She lifted the metal. For a heartbeat, I considered stepping back, declining, making a joke to deflect the weight of it. Instead, I stood still. She pressed the metal against my chest. The contact was warm, not burning, not electric, just warm. The symbols flared. Light rippled outward in a thin wave, passing through me and across the chamber. The crystalline strands along her ears resonated sharply, then settled into a steady hum. The metal locked into place over my heart. The chamber's environmental systems adjusted automatically, as if recognizing a completed command. Silence fell, absolute, no whispers, no murmurs. Even the ever-curious surveillance orb froze mid-hover. The High Noble stared at the metal, then at the Queen. "It has accepted him," he said faintly. "Yes," she replied. I looked down at the dark metal resting against my chest. "So," I said softly, "does this mean I'm no longer under arrest?" A few stunned laughs broke through the stillness. The Queen's lips curved, unmistakably this time. "You are no longer under suspicion," she said. She turned to the chamber. "You stand before the one who altered our fate. No flourish, no dramatics, just fact." The nobles who had watched me in chains now watched me in something far more uncomfortable for them. Legitimacy. The High Noble bowed first. Slowly, deliberately, one by one the others followed. I leaned slightly toward the Queen. "I was hoping for better, Boots," I whispered. Her shoulders shifted faintly, almost laughter. "Do not test the limits of your redemption," she murmured back. I straightened. The metal rested heavily against my chest. And for the first time since I had been escorted through those towering doors in restraints, I understood something terrifying. I had not just survived judgment, I had changed it. They stopped whispering after the metal bonded. They started bowing, which, frankly, was worse. "Please don't," I muttered as the third noble of the morning dipped so low I feared for his spine. "I'm still the same person who got tackled by your security drones." "You are the protector of the Continuum Lattice," he corrected reverently. "I'm a maintenance contractor," I said. "Formerly," he replied. That word followed me everywhere. Formerly restrained, formerly suspect, formerly irrelevant. The metal rested against my chest, warm but no longer humming. It had synchronized with my biometrics within minutes of the ceremony. Now it pulsed faintly whenever I passed near a major energy conduit, as if politely reminding the palace not to implode again. The Queen summoned me to the Defense Council 2 cycles later. This time, no guards. Well, fewer guards. The council chamber projected live feeds from the orbital shield. Engineers, analysts, and military officials filled the tiers. When I entered, conversation paused. Not suspicious. Expectant. I resisted the urge to check whether my boots were untied. "We have reviewed your neural patch," the defense minister said stiffly. "It is unconventional." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my coding," I replied. A few analysts failed to suppress smiles. The Queen sat at the center, composed as always. The crystalline threads along her ears shimmered faintly as data streamed through them. "Our simulations confirm," she said, "that integrating adaptive human modeling into the lattice reduces catastrophic blind spots by 17.8%. 17.8, I said, "That's it." I risked singularity-related vaporization for under 20. 17.8% fewer apocalypses, she corrected. "Ah, when you put it that way." Soft laughter moved through the chamber. The High Noble, now noticeably less rigid around me, folded his hands. "The question before us," he said, "is whether to permanently incorporate this adaptive variance." "You mean humans," I said, a pause. "Yes," he admitted. The Queen's gaze met mine. "You were not invited into our core systems," she said. "You entered because necessity forced it." I nodded. "Would you enter again?" she asked, "if invited?" There it was, not a trial, an offer. I thought of Earth, of cramped docking bays and patchwork ships, of working contracts on the fringes of more advanced civilizations that rarely looked inward. I thought of the moment inside the collapsing lattice, when fear had sharpened into clarity. "Yes," I said, "but not alone. Murmurs. Our systems need diversity," I continued. "Not just human, not just Arcanian. If your algorithms assume uniform thought, they'll always miss the anomaly that doesn't fit. You suggest shared architecture, an analyst said carefully. I suggest shared survival. Silence settled, thoughtful rather than tense. The Queen inclined her head. Then we will establish a joint initiative, she said. A cross-species adaptive defense program. The High Noble blinked. Your Majesty, such openness would alter imperial doctrine. She looked at him calmly. So did a human in restraints. No one argued after that. Within cycles, the palace changed in ways far subtler than ceremonies and medals. Human engineers arrived under official invitation. Arcanian scholars traveled outward for the first time in generations. The lattice was rewritten, not erased, not diminished, but expanded. They even gave the initiative a name. The variants accord. I argued for something catchier. I lost. The first time I re-entered the Defense Corps after the incident, I paused at the threshold. Last time, alarms. This time, authorization chimes. The lattice greeted my neural signature as recognized rather than hostile. It felt different, not submissive, not superior. Just aware. Try not to wrestle it this time, one Arcanian engineer said dryly. No promises, I replied. We worked side by side, mapping blind spots, testing extreme case simulations. We fed the system impossible variables, erratic human intuition, Arcanian harmonic precision, even randomized chaos algorithms from a species that communicated primarily through color shifts. The shield adapted. Not perfectly. Better. One evening, after a particularly heated debate about gravitational slipstreams and whether aggressive humming counted as a legitimate method, I found myself alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the inner ring. The Queen joined me without announcement. You are quieter lately, she observed. I used to think survival was enough, I said. Now I'm responsible for improving things. That's more intimidating. You no longer act only because you are there, she said. No, I admitted. Now I act because I'm invited. She studied me. You have altered more than our lattice. I try not to alter entire civilizations before breakfast, I said. Her lips curved. Our court was certain of your guilt, she said. You could have left after your exoneration. I considered it, I said honestly. Being a hero is exhausting. And yet you remained. Yes. Why? I looked out toward the shield, its energy flowing in layered harmonics, no longer rigidly uniform. Because this place almost died, I said, and now it's trying to live differently. She was silent for a long moment. Then perhaps, she said softly, so are we all. The metal pulsed faintly against my chest, reacting to the proximity of the shield's energy field. I still think the boots should have been part of the award, I added. She actually laughed then, unguarded. I will see what can be arranged, Protector. Please don't call me that. It is accurate. So was Suspect once. Her expression shifted, serious now. And that, she said, is why this matters.